Good afternoon and welcome back to Moving Forward. And this evening we're going to talk a little bit about how you will move forward in who you are. And I know that we've kind of talked on that before, who we are in Christ, but I think we're going to take a little bit of a different approach, kind of looking at that topic tonight. So a lot of times when things come up of who you are, I know like for myself, like I feel like I'm defined by being a wife, by being a mother, who I am at work. So there's a lot of different things that can define us. Sometimes it's physically, sometimes emotionally. So I think when we dig in tonight, we're going to look at kind of a negative self-identity that we may have, or on the flip side of that, kind of that positive where we may be filled with pride or, you know, too much of that positive. So I think that's kind of where we'll start. For me, I think it's, you know, the negative piece, right? I think it's a rinse and repeat, right? You know, you say you're forgiven, but you continue to pick up on something that you've done in the past. You haven't fully surrendered that to God. So for me, it's a constant, okay, I pick it up, let me put it down. I pick it up, I put it down. So I really haven't discovered who that new creature is, because I keep reverting back to the old. What are your kind of thoughts on that, Mitzi, as we start into the discussion?
For me, it's not always, it's not people pleasing, but it's sometimes acknowledging who other people say you are. And allowing someone else to tell me what I need to look like. Pastor's wife is like a very, I joke a lot of times with the ladies, even at church and different things, about how I'm not a pastor's wife. But there's stereotypes that go with that of, when you're a pastor's wife, you should then blah, blah, blah.
Fit this mold.
And, yes. And when you don't, then, you're not a good pastor's wife. And, you don't meet all these expectations. So sometimes it's just learning, and that's just one example, of just learning to be in the Word, to let God tell you who you are, not a title, not a person. And even in that, like even with motherhood, feeling like a bad mom, with wives in general, of not being a good wife, a good helpmate. So there's a lot of, I think, allowing other people or the outside world influence who we think we're supposed to be.
And I think it's sometimes the expectations that they put on you, right? That just kind of weighs you down to thinking, okay, I have to do this based on a label. But if you, to your point, if you're in this word, it doesn't define what a pastor's wife should do or look like. What are your thoughts, Pam, as we...
Well, one thing that came to my mind when you were saying that is sometimes we put those expectations on ourselves. And that is so harmful because we're trying to live up to something, and then we realize that we're the ones that created it. And it's difficult to try to get over that. Whether, excuse me, we were taught that way as a child, from other women. Expecting you to do this and that, and I know, this, being a Southern lady, we get a lot of that. So it's difficult to know who you are sometimes, and I find that to be very true in becoming a Christian and knowing who you are in that. And one of the big things that I identify with is knowing that you're loved by God. Because if you don't understand how much you are loved by God, you can't go further. I mean, it stops you because you just get tied up. And I experienced it myself. The devil will be quick to tell you that you're not lovable. He can't love you now. So I think that's very important in knowing who you are.
Well, and I think he knows where your struggles are, with the who you are, right?
Definitely.
So whether it's the loving piece or whatever, he knows, and at your point, he's going to pick up on that very quickly. And kind of throw those fiery darts at you for that. I think for me, as I kind of looked over, what we were planning to talk about, kind of two things stood out. So for the negative self-identity, it is the motherhood, right? So I'm a working mom, thinking about what my own expectation is, right? And comparing
Right.
that to my mom, who was a stay-at-home mom. So there's
Yeah.
no way, to your point, that I can meet those expectations
Right.
of everything that she did when I was a child, right? So it's back to that rinse and repeat of, okay, today I'm doing good, and then tomorrow it's not.
Right.
Okay, I got to lay that back down. Today I'm doing good, tomorrow I'm not. So
But I think too, you have to realize that you're comparing apples and oranges, because, like you said, she was a stay-at-home mom,
Yeah.
and you're a working mom, and I think it's very possible that working moms can bring just as much to the table that a stay-at-home mom. I mean, their experiences are more, you know. They're missed when they're not there, so there's a closeness that comes about when you are there. You want to make more use of your time, have more quality in your time.
Well, and I think again, it's here. Like, what does it say here, right? About being a mother, and it's really teaching him this, right?
Right.
It's not about being there for X, Y, Z. It's the key things that really matter. So I really struggled with kind of that negative piece. I felt in my life that's where my cycle was at, and then I looked at that positive self-identity, and I was like, oh well, I got something here too, right? So for me, it's I find myself always operating in my own strength, right? It's like,
Right.
okay, I'm going to get this done, I'm going to get this done, and before I know it, I'm like, well, how did I get here? Well, it's because God's like 20 feet behind me, because I feel at times I can operate in my own strength, and I think that's where that pride comes in, and we have to be very cautious because we need God.
Right.
So for me, both of those, the notes that kind of Jamie had shared, I was like, well, they both hit home with me, right? So I think it
Definitely.
could be both. You could maybe only have one or both, but for me, different parts of my life felt
Right.
both of those. So I don't know about you guys, what you felt in kind of digging into that who you are, where you felt the struggles were.
I think all of us, especially when you give your life to Christ. And so no matter how far you are on that journey, you know, the easiest way to defeat someone is to remind them of what they've done.
Right.
You know, and you have, you know, like for me, I have to acknowledge, yes, that's who I was.
Exactly.
Was is the key.
That's the
Yeah.
key thing there, is that's not who I am, and that's not who God created me to be. But only when I gave my life fully surrendered and allow Him to be Lord of my life. But in that same regard, sometimes I can get on the roll and you know, I'm in my word and ministry's going great and this is going great and that's going great. And sometimes, you know, you can look at someone else and think, you know, well, what's wrong with them? Why in the world would they do that? And that's when the devil don't remind me, but the Lord quickly goes, think back, that was you.
Right.
You know, it's so it's easy, I think, for us to get prideful on some days, but it's also easy for us to allow the devil to beat us down in that. So it's just learning that middle ground. But I think God is loving and kind
Definitely.
on both sides of that.
Yeah.
And He'll remind you when you're listening to the wrong voice, if you're in your word.
Right.
And He'll remind you when you're thinking of yourself too highly, when you're in the Word. And one of my favorite verses was the 1 Corinthians 15 from 9 and 10 is just a paraphrase of what he was saying. It goes, I am what I am only by God's grace.
Amen.
Yeah.
You know, and that holds so true for me today, is that I'm only who I am today and only have the ability to be who God created me to be today because of God's grace. And because He opened the door for me to accept that grace into my life. And too many times, sometimes after we've surrendered our lives to Christ, we start to forget that it wasn't us,
It was Him.
it was Him.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think you made a point there of like looking at others and, well, what they're doing wrong, right? But we have to remember, like, we don't know the battles,
That's
right? I mean, and maybe they're not where they need to be, but maybe they're not where they used to be either.
Exactly.
That's right.
You know, so I think it's interesting, this word kindness keeps coming up, right? Like we're doing that with the children right now, and it's just meeting people where they're at, and showing them kindness, right? And we have to do that by having Christ in us, and sharing the negative, and then working on the prideful pieces.
Right.
So,
And I try to deal with that, excuse me, personally, by remembering how much he loves me. And that commandment he gave us to love one another. And regardless of what you see in that other person, the first thing I want to come to my mind, and with the Lord's help it can, that I have love for that person.
That's right.
Regardless of where they are in their walk. And it's not easy, because you know the flesh jumps in and wants you to see other things, but it's that love. And I think the more that you accept and really comprehend the love of God, and I sometimes even pray, Lord, just fill me up with your love and just let it pour out, you know, because in that people see the Jesus in us, you know, and it, like I said, it's not easy, so it's not going to be a perfected task every time.
well, and I think one of the verses that you know, we had shared was the John 15:5, right? And it's exactly what you're talking about. Like, alone we cannot do it.
We can't.
Like, in our human flesh, we cannot do it, right? We can't love those people. It's only with him, because without him we can't do anything.
Right.
So to me, that really jumped out to say, okay, when it's difficult, loving difficult people, or, you know, even yourself, for the things of the past.
Sometimes we're that difficult person.
We're the difficult person.
Exactly.
But, or if you're, you know, trying to get through one of those situations where you're maybe filled with too much pride.
Right.
That's where you got to step back and say, okay, Lord, I need you to help do this.
And I think the Christians have gotten a reputation for that. You know, that they look down their nose at sinners.
Right.
And I mean, how many times have you come across someone and you just, the conversation just went to be about God, you know, and just say something, and they look at you like, are you judging me? You know?
Right.
Oh, and it's like they go automatically on the defense. And it's like, you know, religious people have hurt
Right.
a lot of people.
And well, I think that's a big difference, right? Like the religious people, right?
Right.
That don't fully
Surrender,
aren't fully filled with that.
Right.
That they can't be who Christ has called them to be. And I think that's the important piece, right? It's not about who I want to be as a mom. It's who Christ has called me to be as a mom, and
I
what
think
that looks like.
And I think it's hard because personality-wise, all of us aren't given that ability to just give love and just to be open and just to be giving all the time to people. I mean, some of us, we have to mature in that. And it's through staying in the Word and letting Him develop that in you. When you come to Christ, it's not automatically you're a new creature and everything's in you. I mean, it's in you that you need, but it's got to be developed so it can come out. Yes, it's got to be marinated, exactly. I mean, and I think a lot of people forget that, and they think that, you know, they just go through the motions, but they don't really interact with the Word and with the prayer. And sometimes we need to just listen to Him and let Him show us these things and help us to see where we're getting it wrong.
Right.
And how to change things. I mean, I've even prayed about things and He's told me, well, this is the way you need to look at this. And sometimes I don't like what I see, but it's very useful. It's very much needed.
But I think sometimes I know I'm like, I don't know what to do, right? Like, what do we do, right? And the verse I came across was in Psalms 130, verse 5. And this is hard. I wait for the Lord. In case I didn't hear that. My soul waits.
Right.
And in His Word, I hope, right? So this is where I'm going to find the hope for who I am, is in His Word. And sometimes that's not going to be quick, to your point. It takes time, and that's why sometimes we have to wait, and we have to be in the Word and really kind of figure out who He wants us to be.
Right. And I think sometimes, you know, He waits on us to get to the point where we're ready. I mean, we can't accept it all at one time. And I thank him so much for his mercy in knowing when to show me some things. Because, you know, there's been points in my life where if he'd have showed it to me at that point, I wouldn't have cared for it. I mean, that sounds harsh, but I just wasn't in a place that I was receiving.
Right.
You know, and I think that's going back to, you have to mature in your walk with God. You don't get it all at one time. Some people do, and I think that's wonderful, but not all of us are that fortunate to where we get it all. We have to mature into it.
I think we could be defeated.
Yes.
God knows what we can handle when we can handle it, and what it's going to take for us to get there.
Right.
You know, if you screamed at somebody everything they've ever done wrong and what they need to make right, you know, they may just crumble and say, okay, see, I can't do that.
Right.
But God pulls us along, and he starts showing us and mending in us. And one of the things I love to share with people when I get the marvelous opportunity to do some mentoring back and forth is that, you know, things that I remember the first 5 years when I'd given my life to Christ, that God took away and changed in my life. You know, they were huge. And then you hit that plateau and you're like, I'm doing good. You know, like, okay, my life is getting straight. And then all of a sudden God's like, okay, so we took out the big chunks. So now let's work on some middle stuff. And then he starts showing you these other areas. And then you hit that spot again and you're like, okay. And you're like, man, am I ever going to get this? Right. Lord, this is just rough, but you keep going. And then he starts pointing out these things that if he would have told you in the beginning that this thing was an issue in your life, you'd have been like, this is ridiculous. Really, this is not something. But now he's cleaned up so much that, you know, the sand
that's fine-tuning
fell down at the bottom of the container, you know, that we would just wash away. He's like, no, let's take every grain.
Right.
And let's fix the, you know, like show you and make these things in you.
Well, it reminds me of the song, like as a kid, he's still working on me, right? Like he's still working on me to make me what I ought to be.
Not me working
on me. It's not me
on
working on me.
As a kid, I like those songs today.
Right.
He's still working on me.
I sing those to myself quite frequently.
Me too, for sure.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, as we think about this series, right, like moving forward, how do we share with our Finding the More family? How do they move forward in who they are, right? You know, and that's really, I think, how we help them take that next step. So maybe they're struggling with some of the stuff that we just talked about. Pam, what are some of the things, you know, as someone kind of sharing this topic that you would say, hey, I think this is what I've done to help me move forward?
I think that the thing that's helped me the most, and I mean, I've been a Christian a long time, but it was surprising to come face to face with God and accept his love. I mean, the devil liked to throw my past up. I mean, there's things that, you know, I could change in my life that, you know, defeat me sometimes, and I feel unworthy. But the thing that's helped me the most is just knowing how much he loves me. And especially this time of the year, when we're celebrating Easter and the sacrifice he made. I mean, how much love he had. He would have done it just for me.
Right.
And when you comprehend that love, it changes everything. It did for me, because it defined who I was by how much he loved me. And it was surprising because, like I said, I'd been a Christian for a long time. And it was like, why was this surprising?
Right.
But it helped me to break the chains. He broke those chains with love. He helped me to let go of the past because he loved me enough to forgive me. You know, it just created something in me to want to love others, to want to be the better self.
Right.
Because I had that love in me. I knew that love. It's funny, I was on the way over here and I read this sign on a church, and it said, do you know true love?
Mm.
And I was happy to say yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I know the true love, and it changes everything.
Yeah.
It does.
Mitzi, what about for you? Kind of in moving forward, what thoughts would you share on how someone could move forward in this area?
I mean, it's easy to say be in your word.
Right.
Everything's be in your word. But if you don't know how to be in your word, I mean, that is throwing that catchphrase out at somebody. For me, it's grasping that thing that's the hardest for you. So anger is something, I'm supposed to be loving. And so for me to understand who I am in Christ, it was always a defeating point for me, is that, if you're a child of God, you're supposed to love people.
Right.
And yet now you're so angry. That proves you're not really. So it kind of defeated me. So that thing, and I can't say what that thing
Right.
is for you or for y'all, yours was, you needed to truly grasp that love. And
Right.
that was something big for me too. But on the flip side of that was understanding then, the devil is always saying, well, you can't really be, you're not who you say you are because you're so angry. So doing a search. I mean, and now it's easy. It's not like you have to just kind of hunt through your scriptures and hope you can find something. You can do a Google search.
Right.
One of my favorite sites, blueletterbible.com, and you can put in anger, wrath, and you can start to see what the Bible says about that, what God is saying, and how you can manage, how God can transform those parts of your life. And so for me, to better know how to move forward in who God's called me to be, who I am in Christ, it is to take those attributes one at a time. Like I said earlier, don't defeat yourself and try to crash. But maybe the one thing when I just said that, it's that that one thing that always makes you feel defeated. That one thing that you struggle with.
Or that people say about you.
Yes,
Right.
that people throw up at you.
Yeah.
And you want to know where you stand on it and where you stand with God on it. Look up those verses.
Yeah. Because I think the definition of identity is attributes and characteristics, right?
That's right.
So making a list of what those are.
Yes.
And doing a search. And even in the Bible app, you can search, right?
Right.
And it just brings up all the verses.
Yeah.
It'll bring up lessons.
I was like, you can do a Google search. You can go, there's so many Bible apps. That's what I said, it makes it easier for you. If you struggle with reading the Bible, it reads to you.
Yep.
I mean, so that there's so many ways now to easily access that. So there's really not an excuse anymore.
Yeah.
Of not being able to get into it and not getting lost
Right.
in the Word. You can look, you can put in there verses on and pick any topic, and it'll give you 83 verses, 23 verses. The least I've ever found was like 9 on a topic.
Right.
But a lot of times it's 80 to 100 and something verses.
Well, I think the good thing about that, like to your point, if you search anger, it's going to pull up words like wrath. So
yes,
it's going to do that work for you, which is great.
And take it in bite-sized pieces. Take one verse, or read through them till you that verse pops out.
Yeah.
Right.
And then keep praying over it with it. I think me and you both talked about, we love Psalms 139 before we was conversing about this. And it says it at the beginning, and like you said, it repeats it in case you forgot. And it's about search me. And it tells you, he says, I know that, the thoughts, he thinks many thoughts of me.
Right.
The God who created the universe has thoughts towards me.
He knows me.
So read that over and over and let God show you. Let him start demonstrating that to you without having to get lost
Right.
in the whole Bible.
Yeah.
I think that's good.
I think for me, my advice was just to be honest with God.
Definitely.
Right? He already knows
There you
it,
go.
right? Like as I went through this pre-work and I did it, and I was like, I don't like that. So, but because I was honest on the page, right? Like, I'm not who God has called me to be right now.
Right.
Yeah.
and that's okay, right? To be honest, because he was like, well, finally, you know, like, so he wants you to be honest, because then you can truly move forward. Because until then, you're stuck. You're just stuck.
Something we've talked about before, I think all of us at the ministry at one time or another, is that yes, we should be moving forward, but even the prophets of old took time to sit still.
Yeah.
Right.
And God ministered. He didn't argue it. He didn't belittle them. He didn't, you know, and you know what? I'm right there with you. I'm not the best of who God would call me to be right now. I'm not. And that breaks my heart, and you know, we don't want to say that.
Right. And I didn't. And I want to lay under the bush, and I want somebody to bring me cake, and I want to go back to sleep.
And
right.
Like
okay.
that. And that's understanding that part of the battle is being honest with yourself before you can be honest with God.
Right.
And then letting Him tell you part of your moving forward is to be still for a moment.
Right.
And I know, like, when I was working on this, I told you, I don't like this topic. This is hard. Those were my words to you, right?
It was.
This is hard because, to your point, I had to be honest with myself, right? And it starts with that I wait, which means I got to sit.
Right.
For my soul waits, you know? So, I mean, that's where it has to start is being honest.
And that's how you move forward.
And that's how you move forward. And it's...
But how did you feel when you were honest and you said that out loud?
It was
today?
like
it's a release. I mean, because I toiled with something for years and years and years and felt totally guilty about it. And when I was just praying and it came out of me, it was like, oh my God, I cannot believe I said that to you, you know? But it gave him an opportunity. And I mean, you can hear it. I've been waiting for you to say that.
Yeah.
And I think I put 3 bullet points and I was like, I'm done, but I did come back to it.
Right.
But regardless, I am still his,
Right.
and I'm still loved by him.
That doesn't change.
It doesn't
You know, and
change.
I think back to your point, you have to be in the Word to remember those promises, right? Or you will feel defeated. So, so we encourage you, after you watch this, spend some time making a list of what those characteristics are. Be honest, and begin to do the hard work so that you can move forward.
Right.
So until next time, keep moving forward.